Welcome to Bytes, where history's most remarkable figures come to life, each story revealing the depths of human resilience, ambition, and, at times, unfathomable cruelty. Today, we're exploring a legend forged in fire and blood, a tale from the heart of Africa that challenges our understanding of leadership, power, and the capacity for both greatness and devastation. We're venturing into the world of Shaka Zulu, one of history's most enigmatic leaders, whose rise from a young warrior to a formidable king shaped not only his people, but also left an impact that echoes across continents and centuries. So sit back, prepare to be transported to a time when kingdoms were built by sheer will and raw courage. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a journey into the mind of a leader who redefined warfare, forever altering the destiny of the Zulu nation. And now, let's begin. In the shadowy mists of southern Africa, around the summer of 1787, a child was born, a child who would one day reshape the land with the sheer force of his will and his unyielding vision. His name was Shaka Zulu, though history would come to know him simply as Shaka Zulu. From the beginning, Shaka's life was marked by hardship and resilience, challenges that would forge him into a leader of unmatched resolve and brutality. Shaka was born into the Zulu clan, a small group nestled in what is now known as KwaZulu-Natal, in the northeast of modern South Africa. His father, Senzangakona, was the chieftain of this modest Zulu clan. Though Senzangakona ruled his people, he was a minor figure, one chief among many in a land divided among competing tribes and clans. At Shaka's birth, there was little to suggest that he would one day unite these fragmented tribes and become a leader feared and revered across the region. But his early years would not be easy, and the hardships he endured would cultivate within him a fierce determination, a strength that would set him apart from all others. Shaka's mother, Nandi, was the daughter of a neighboring chief of the Langeni people. However, Shaka's birth was considered illegitimate in the eyes of Zulu custom, because Nandi was not one of Senzangakona's recognized wives. This single fact would shape Shaka's life in profound ways. Seen as an outsider within his own family, Shaka and his mother faced scorn and rejection, cast out by the Zulu clan during Shaka's early childhood. These early years were marked by a nomadic existence. Shaka and his mother moved frequently, often facing the harsh judgment of Zulu society. Finally, they found refuge among the Mthethwa people, a neighboring clan where Shaka would take his first steps toward the path that would lead him to power. For Shaka, life in exile was a double-edged sword. On one hand, he faced the humiliation of being an outcast, a child born into shame, his every action watched and judged. But this hardship also offered him a unique perspective and a profound sense of determination. He learned quickly, adapting to his new surroundings and building an unbreakable bond with his mother, who instilled in him the resilience and tenacity he would carry into adulthood. As he grew, Shaka's resilience and fighting spirit set him apart from his peers, his sheer willpower overcoming the shame and stigma that had plagued his early years. As a young man, Shaka joined the warrior class of the Mthethwa, where his natural prowess and bravery soon became apparent. It wasn't long before his abilities caught the attention of the Mthethwa king, Dingiswayo, who would become a mentor to Shaka. Dingiswayo saw potential in this young man, a strength, a fierceness, and a determination that went beyond mere survival. Under Dingiswayo's guidance, Shaka's fighting skills sharpened, his understanding of strategy deepened, and his ambition grew. But there were signs, even in those early years, of the violence that would later come to define his rule. On one occasion, Dingiswayo sent Shaka and a group of warriors to raid a neighboring clan, the Amambata, in what was intended to be a simple cattle raid, a task that would involve minimal violence. But Shaka's instincts led him to unleash a brutal assault on the Amambata, pursuing them ruthlessly and killing many before returning to Dingiswayo with the stolen cattle. Dingiswayo was shocked. He chastised Shaka for his excessive force, emphasizing that it was not Mthethwa policy to exterminate others in such a manner. This moment reveals a glimpse of Shaka's character, a man who saw violence not as a means to an end, but as an intrinsic part of his identity. While he respected Dingiswayo, he saw the restraint that his mentor preached as a weakness, a limitation that he himself would never accept. Shaka's path would be different. He would pursue power with an intensity that left no room for mercy. In the world into which Shaka was born, violence and conflict were woven into the fabric of daily life. The Zulu and Mthethwa, like other Bantu-speaking tribes in the region, belonged to a larger cultural group that spanned much of sub-Saharan Africa. These tribes shared a common linguistic heritage, but they were divided into numerous clans, each one vying for land, cattle, and power. The clans lived off the land, their wealth measured by the number of cattle they owned. In this world, cattle were more than livestock. They were a form of currency, a measure of wealth and a source of social status. Shaka's people, the Zulus, lived in scattered clans across the northeast of what we now call South Africa, from the Tugela River in the south to the Pongola River in the north. In this environment, survival was a matter of strength, alliances, and cunning. The Zulus were part of a much larger network of Bantu-speaking peoples that stretched across Africa, yet they were a minor force, a relatively obscure clan with little influence compared to the powerful Ndwandwe and Mthethwa tribes to their north. In Zulu society, life was organized around the kraal, a homestead and economic unit at the center of each clan. Here, families lived, raised their cattle, and practiced the rituals and traditions that had been passed down through generations. Society was built around the family unit, led by the clan chief, or Nkosi, whose authority rested on his ability to provide for his people and protect them from external threats. For the Zulus and their neighboring clans, society revolved around cattle and tradition. Cattle provided milk, meat, and leather, serving as the backbone of their economy and a central aspect of their identity. Yet, as the 18th century drew to a close, the Zulu way of life was beginning to change. As the population grew and herds expanded, land became scarce, and the Zulu people began to push outward, seeking new pastures for their cattle. This expansion brought them into conflict with other tribes, particularly the Khoi to the southwest. The competition for resources intensified, and alliances became essential for survival. Against this backdrop of scarcity and conflict, Shaka's formative years were shaped by both the traditions of his people and the harsh reality of life as an outsider. In exile, he watched and learned, observing the strengths and weaknesses of those around him. He saw how authority was maintained, how loyalty could be won, and most importantly, how fear could be a powerful tool for control. But for all his strength and intelligence, Shaka remained haunted by his past, by the rejection he had suffered, by the stigma of his illegitimacy, and by the burning desire to prove himself not only to his family, but to the entire Zulu nation. As he trained and grew under Dingiswayo's watchful eye, he honed his instincts, preparing for the day when he would no longer be an outcast, no longer a mere warrior, but a leader who would make the world remember his name. Shaka's rise to power would not be gentle or gradual. It would be a swift and violent ascent, marked by bloodshed, betrayal, and the unbreakable will of a man who saw the world as his to conquer. His journey was just beginning, and the path he would carve would forever change the history of southern Africa. Shaka's story truly begins in his early years, marked by trials and challenges that would shape him into the fierce and complex leader he became. Born around the summer of 1787 in the heart of what is today KwaZulu-Natal, Shaka was thrust into a world defined by tradition, clan rivalry, and a strict social hierarchy. His birth name, Shaka Kasenzanga Kona, carried the weight of his father's lineage, yet his path from childhood was far from one of privilege. Shaka's father, Senzanga Kona, was the chief of the small Zulu clan, one of many scattered across the northeastern region of modern South Africa. Senzanga Kona's role as leader offered him influence and respect within his clan, yet in the greater landscape of the region, his power was minor compared to larger neighboring tribes, such as the Ndwandwe to the north and the Mthethwa to the southwest. In these early years, the Zulus were still relatively unknown, existing as a modest group in a competitive environment where larger tribes wielded considerable power. As was custom among the Zulu people, Senzanga Kona had several wives, each marriage aimed at strengthening alliances or consolidating his authority within the clan. Yet, when Shaka was conceived, Nandi, his mother, was not among these recognized wives. Nandi was the daughter of a local chief of the Langjani people, a neighboring clan to the Zulus. Her relationship with Senzanga Kona began in scandal. Nandi was not officially married to him, and when she gave birth to Shaka, both mother and child faced the painful stigma of illegitimacy. In the eyes of Zulu custom, Shaka's birth was seen as improper, even dishonorable. This single fact defined Shaka's childhood, casting him as an outsider even before he had the chance to understand his place in the world. For his first few years, Shaka and Nandi lived among the Zulu, but they were not fully embraced. Instead, they endured ridicule and rejection, with whispers and insults following them, marking Shaka's formative years with an indelible sense of humiliation and resentment. This tension soon came to a breaking point. Senzanga Kona, pressured by his position and the social expectations of his people, ultimately cast out Nandi and Shaka, forcing them to leave the Zulu homeland. What followed was a difficult and often harsh nomadic life for mother and son, moving from one place to another, never fully welcomed. Shaka learned from a young age that survival often meant resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to face hardship head-on. These lessons would stay with him throughout his life, becoming the foundation of his leadership style. After several years of wandering, Nandi and Shaka eventually found refuge among the Mthethwa people, a powerful clan led by a king named Dingiswayo. Here, in this new environment, Shaka found a community that would begin to mold him into a warrior. The Mthethwa were known for their military organization and skill in warfare, and Dingiswayo, their leader, was a man who valued strength and cunning. In the young Shaka, Dingiswayo saw potential, a spark that could be kindled into something greater. Shaka's exile among the Mthethwa was a turning point, setting him on a path that would lead him back to his people, not as an outsider, but as a conqueror. As Shaka grew older, he entered the warrior class of the Mthethwa, where he trained relentlessly, pushing himself to the limits of his endurance and skill. For the first time, he was surrounded by young men like himself, who had a clear sense of purpose and a fierce loyalty to their leader. Under the guidance of Dingiswayo, Shaka's talents blossomed. He was not only strong and fast, but also intelligent and observant, with a mind for strategy that set him apart from his peers. The Mthethwa, like other Bantu-speaking tribes of the region, followed a warrior tradition deeply rooted in the need for protection and survival. Their society was built around the kraal system, with each homestead serving as a miniature fortress. Men trained from an early age to protect their families and cattle, symbols of wealth and status, from rival clans. Here, among the Mthethwa, Shaka began to see the potential of a unified people, bound by a common purpose and directed by a strong leader. The influence of Dingiswayo on Shaka cannot be overstated. Dingiswayo was more than a mentor. He was a father figure, one who recognized the strength within Shaka and pushed him to refine it. But Dingiswayo also believed in restraint, a concept that Shaka struggled to embrace. The older king saw warfare as a tool, a means to secure resources and protect his people, but not a vehicle for unnecessary cruelty. Shaka, however, harbored a more ruthless approach. In his eyes, violence was not merely a tool, but a force that could instill fear, command respect, and maintain absolute control. On one notable occasion, Dingiswayo sent Shaka and a group of warriors on a raid against a neighboring tribe, the Amambata. This raid was intended to be a simple show of strength, with limited violence to secure cattle and demonstrate power. But Shaka's natural ferocity led him to take the mission further. He drove his men to pursue the Amambata relentlessly, attacking them with brutal precision. By the time he returned to Dingiswayo with the spoils, Shaka had left a trail of devastation in his wake. Dingiswayo was taken aback by the bloodshed, reprimanding Shaka for his excessive use of force and reminding him of the Mthethwa's principles of measured aggression. This event reveals a critical aspect of Shaka's character, a man who saw violence as more than just a means to an end. For Shaka, brutality was a demonstration of power, an unyielding statement that he was not to be challenged. Dingiswayo's reprimand may have resonated with Shaka on some level, but it did not alter his perspective. Instead, it reinforced his belief that true strength lay in commanding respect through fear, a philosophy that would come to define his rule. As he trained and fought with the Mthethwa, Shaka's abilities continued to evolve. He was not only a skilled fighter, but also an observer, taking note of weaknesses and developing new tactics. Shaka began to question the traditional Zulu methods of warfare, seeing them as inefficient and outdated. He believed that the way battles were fought could be transformed, that discipline, unity, and an element of surprise could turn the tide even against larger, stronger foes. His time with the Mthethwa allowed him to experiment with these ideas, laying the groundwork for a military revolution that would later change the course of Zulu history. Yet despite his growing power and influence among the Mthethwa, Shaka never forgot his roots. The memory of his rejection by the Zulu haunted him, fueling a desire to prove himself and reclaim his birthright. He saw his time with the Mthethwa not as the culmination of his journey, but as a stepping stone toward something greater, a chance to return to the Zulu, not as a humble exile, but as a leader, a conqueror who would unite his people and build an empire. As the years passed, Shaka's ambition continued to grow, nurtured by the strength he found within himself and the skills he had honed under Dingiswayo's mentorship. He knew that one day he would return to the Zulu and stake his claim as their rightful leader. But he also understood that this would require more than mere strength or skill. It would demand absolute commitment, a willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone that stood in his way. In Shaka's mind, the Zulu kingdom was not merely a collection of clans and families. It was his destiny, a vision of unity and power that only he could bring to life. And so, with each passing day, he prepared himself, training his mind and body for the challenges that lay ahead. He was no longer the rejected son of Senzangakona. He was Shaka, a warrior, a leader, and soon, a king who would reshape the fate of an entire people. As Shaka's strength and reputation grew among the Mthethwa, so did his ambition. The young warrior was no longer content to merely serve. He harbored dreams of leading, of returning to the Zulu, and reclaiming the status that had been denied him since birth. Every lesson he learned, every skill he mastered under the mentorship of King Dingiswayo was another step toward his ultimate goal, to return to his people, not as an outcast, but as their ruler. But for Shaka, the journey to the Zulu throne would be steeped in blood and betrayal. By the time he reached his early 20s, Shaka's reputation had spread. He was not only known for his strength and skill in combat, but for his tactical mind and the ruthless resolve that set him apart from other warriors. His experiences with the Mthethwa had shown him that power was not just about physical strength. It was about control, about cultivating fear, and about inspiring absolute loyalty. And while Dingiswayo's influence tempered him to some degree, Shaka's vision for leadership was far more intense, far more relentless than anything the Mthethwa king could have foreseen. Shaka's path toward power began in earnest around 1816, with the death of his father, Senzangakona, the Zulu chieftain who had once cast him and his mother aside. Senzangakona's death left a void in the Zulu leadership, a vacancy that others within the clan were quick to fill. According to the tradition of the Zulu, Senzangakona had appointed another of his sons, Sigujana, as his successor. But Shaka saw this as his moment, his chance to finally seize the power that he believed should have been his by birthright. Yet Shaka knew that he could not reclaim his position alone. He needed allies, warriors who would follow him into battle, and support from within the Zulu clan to legitimize his claim. This is where his relationship with Dingiswayo became crucial. Recognizing Shaka's potential, and perhaps even sensing the unstoppable drive within him, Dingiswayo provided Shaka with a military escort, a group of Mthethwa warriors who would stand beside him in his quest to overthrow Sigujana and claim his place as leader of the Zulu. With this newfound support, Shaka began his journey back to the land of his birth. As he approached his homeland, he was no longer a cast-out son but a warrior, backed by a formidable military force. His ambition was clear, his intent unmistakable: to take the Zulu throne by whatever means necessary. Shaka had spent years honing his strength, his skill, and his strategy, and he knew that he was ready to confront his half-brother Sigujana and anyone else who dared to challenge him. The events that followed reveal much about Shaka's ruthless character. He did not wait for an opportunity to arise naturally, nor did he negotiate with Sigujana for the position of leadership. Instead, Shaka orchestrated an assassination, enlisting the help of another half-brother named Ngwadi to execute Sigujana. It was a decisive and brutal move, one that demonstrated Shaka's willingness to eliminate anyone who stood between him and his goals. With Sigujana dead, Shaka now stood as the sole claimant to the Zulu throne, returning to his people not with words or diplomacy, but with an iron will and an army at his back. Shaka's return to the Zulu homeland marked a pivotal moment in the history of his people. No longer seen as an outcast or an illegitimate son, he arrived at the head of a powerful Mthethwa military force, a visual testament to his strength and authority. Those who had once scorned him were either executed or quickly fell in line, recognizing the unstoppable force he had become. Shaka had not only taken control of the Zulu, but he had done so with a level of authority and intimidation that demanded immediate respect. But for Shaka, claiming the title of leader was only the beginning. His ambition extended far beyond the borders of the Zulu clan. He envisioned a united kingdom, a single entity composed of not just the Zulu, but other neighboring tribes as well. This was a vision that had never before been realized in the region, a bold concept that would require a new approach to leadership, warfare, and governance. And so, Shaka set about transforming his people, implementing changes that would reshape the Zulu into a force capable of achieving his grand vision. The first of Shaka's changes was his approach to warfare. He knew that to expand his power, he would need an army that could conquer, an army that was disciplined, unified, and deadly. The traditional Zulu fighting style, while effective in small skirmishes, was too reliant on numbers and brute force, a method that Shaka deemed inefficient and predictable. To secure his position and realize his ambitions, he would need to revolutionize the way his people fought. Under Shaka's leadership, the Zulu army underwent a dramatic transformation. Gone were the long throwing spears, which had been the primary weapon for generations. Shaka introduced a shorter, more versatile weapon known as the iklwa, a stabbing spear designed for close-quarters combat. Unlike the traditional assegai, which could be thrown from a distance, the iklwa forced warriors to engage their enemies up close, face to face. This change required a new level of discipline and bravery, but it also made the Zulu army more effective, allowing them to engage their enemies with precision and intensity. But the iklwa was only part of Shaka's strategy. He also introduced new formations and tactics, including the famous bullhorn formation, which would become a hallmark of Zulu warfare. In this formation, the army was divided into 3 sections: the horns, which flanked the enemy and closed in from both sides; the chest, which engaged the enemy head-on; and the loins, a reserve force that could reinforce the other units as needed. This tactical approach enabled the Zulu to encircle and overpower their opponents, often overwhelming them with a combination of speed, strength, and surprise. Through these military innovations, Shaka transformed the Zulu from a modest clan into a formidable fighting force. His warriors were not only well-trained and disciplined, but fiercely loyal, bound by a shared sense of purpose and an unbreakable commitment to their leader. Shaka's vision was becoming a reality, a kingdom forged in battle, one that would grow through strength and unity. Yet Shaka's methods were not without consequence. His rise to power and the changes he implemented came at a cost, one that often involved the suffering of those who opposed him. In his pursuit of a unified kingdom, Shaka was unrelenting, showing little mercy to those who resisted his rule. Villages were burned, rival leaders were eliminated, and any who dared to challenge him were met with swift and brutal retribution. Shaka's path to power was one paved with blood and sacrifice, a relentless drive to achieve his vision of a united Zulu kingdom. And as he consolidated his rule, his ambition continued to grow. He was no longer content to be a mere leader of a clan. He saw himself as the architect of an empire, a leader who could bring together the fragmented tribes of southern Africa and create a legacy that would endure. In the years that followed, Shaka would continue to expand his influence, forging alliances and subduing rivals in his quest to build a powerful kingdom. His return to the Zulu had marked the beginning of a new era, one that would reshape the region and leave an indelible mark on the history of his people. But even as he rose to power, there were signs of the darkness that lay beneath Shaka's ambition, a willingness to use fear and violence not just as tools, but as defining aspects of his rule. The man who had once been an outcast had become a king, but he would not be content with mere authority. For Shaka, power was not simply a means to an end. It was a force that demanded absolute control, and he would stop at nothing to secure it. With his position as leader of the Zulu firmly established, Shaka turned his focus toward building a kingdom that would not only survive, but dominate. He had seen the weaknesses of fragmented tribes, each operating independently with little organization or discipline. For Shaka, unity was the path to strength, but this unity would require a fundamental transformation in the way his people lived, fought, and thought about themselves as a collective force. Shaka was determined to instill a level of discipline and resilience that went far beyond what his people had known, reforms that would redefine Zulu society itself. The heart of Shaka's vision lay in the reformation of the Zulu military. To him, the army was more than just a group of warriors. It was the backbone of the state, the mechanism through which he could exert his will and secure his territory. Shaka's early experiences with the Imethethwa had given him insights into the power of a well-organized and disciplined military force, but he intended to push this concept even further, transforming the Zulu warriors into one of the most feared military forces in the region. One of Shaka's first significant reforms was the introduction of the iklwa, a short stabbing spear that replaced the traditional long-throwing spear, the assegai. While the assegai allowed warriors to attack from a distance, it lacked the brutal efficiency Shaka desired. He envisioned a weapon that would force his warriors into close combat, instilling a mentality of relentless aggression and eliminating any distance between them and their opponents. The iklwa became a symbol of Shaka's new Zulu army, demanding courage, resilience, and commitment from every warrior who wielded it. The iklwa also aligned with Shaka's tactical innovations. He introduced the famous bullhorn formation, a strategy that changed the way battles were fought and gave the Zulu an edge even against larger or more technologically advanced armies. In this formation, the army was divided into three main sections: the chest, which would confront the enemy head-on; the horns, which would swing around to flank the enemy on both sides; and the loins, a reserve force of elite warriors waiting behind the main line to reinforce the others if necessary. This maneuver allowed the Zulu to encircle their opponents, trapping them in a deadly embrace and often leading to a swift, decisive victory. These changes, however, went beyond tactics. Shaka was creating a culture within his army that valued discipline above all else. The traditional ways of warfare among the Zulu and neighboring tribes had often relied on sheer numbers and basic strategy. Shaka's approach, in contrast, was organized, methodical, and ruthlessly efficient. Warriors were drilled endlessly, taught to obey commands without hesitation, and conditioned to endure physical hardship without complaint. His soldiers learned to march long distances without rest, often covering 20 or more kilometers in a single day. While legends exaggerate these distances, the training was grueling, designed to build an army that could move quickly and strike without warning. But Shaka's reforms extended beyond weapons and tactics. He understood that an effective army required not only physical strength, but also mental resilience and a sense of purpose. To this end, Shaka created a structure within his military that went beyond simple ranks. He divided his warriors into age-based regiments, called amabutho, with each group bonded by their shared experience and loyalty to one another. The older, More experienced warriors held leadership positions, while the younger recruits learned by watching and emulating their seniors. This created a powerful sense of unity and camaraderie among the Zulu soldiers, each knowing they were part of something greater than themselves. The regiments were more than just military units. They became central to Zulu society. Young men entered the Amabuto as teenagers, undergoing rigorous training that not only prepared them for battle, but instilled in them the values of loyalty and discipline that Shaka demanded. These regiments lived, trained, and fought together, forging bonds that extended beyond the battlefield. For Shaka, this was about more than just building a powerful military force. It was about creating a shared identity, a sense of purpose that would hold his kingdom together. The warriors were not merely fighters. They were the embodiment of Zulu strength and unity. Shaka's reforms also impacted the role of women within Zulu society. While they were not part of the military, women were given responsibilities that supported the new structure of the kingdom. Women became integral to the daily operations of the military, tasked with managing the kraals, or homesteads where warriors lived, and handling supplies for the army. Shaka's approach extended the values of loyalty and discipline to all members of society, making everyone a part of his grand vision, whether they wielded a spear or managed the resources that sustained the warriors. One of the most significant aspects of Shaka's societal reforms was his restructuring of Zulu loyalty and identity. Previously, clan loyalty had been the highest allegiance for most Zulu, with each individual's primary loyalty directed toward their specific family or clan leader. Shaka disrupted this system, demanding that loyalty to him and the Zulu nation come above all else. This was a radical shift, one that required the dismantling of traditional clan structures in favor of a centralized authority, the authority of Shaka himself. By breaking down these clan affiliations, he forged a sense of collective Zulu identity, transforming his people from a loosely connected group of clans into a unified kingdom. With this centralization of power came the erosion of some traditional societal norms. Shaka took measures to curb the influence of the powerful spiritual class, the Izangoma or witch doctors, who had traditionally held sway over Zulu life. Shaka saw these spiritual leaders as potential threats to his authority, fearing that their influence could rival his own. To neutralize this, he imposed strict controls on their practices, incorporating elements of their rituals into his own displays of power, thereby aligning the spiritual life of his people with the strength of the Zulu state. By placing himself at the head of both the military and the spiritual hierarchy, Shaka ensured that his people's loyalty was directed entirely toward him. The impact of Shaka's reforms was far-reaching. Under his leadership, the Zulu army became one of the most formidable forces in southern Africa, capable of defeating much larger tribes and expanding the Zulu territory significantly. Shaka's regiments did not merely defend the Zulu borders, they carried his ambition forward, subduing rival clans and consolidating control over vast regions. His innovations in warfare spread throughout the region, influencing neighboring tribes and even altering the balance of power in southeastern Africa. Yet Shaka's reforms were not without cost. His rule was marked by strict discipline, and disobedience was met with brutal punishment. Warriors who showed hesitation or fear in battle could expect swift retribution, often in the form of death. For Shaka, there was no room for weakness, and his methods reflected this uncompromising stance. His kingdom was built on loyalty and fear, a combination that kept his people in line but left little room for dissent. Those who opposed him, whether from within the Zulu or from rival tribes, were shown no mercy, a policy that would earn Shaka a reputation for ruthlessness and cruelty. By the early 1820s, Shaka had transformed the Zulu into a powerful and unified kingdom, a force to be reckoned with among the tribes of southern Africa. His innovations had reshaped the very fabric of Zulu society, instilling a sense of national identity and loyalty that transcended traditional clan boundaries. The young warrior who had once been an outcast was now a king, a ruler who commanded respect through his reforms and struck fear through his unyielding resolve. For Shaka, this was only the beginning. He had laid the foundation for a powerful kingdom, one that would endure long after his death. Yet as he expanded his influence and solidified his rule, Shaka's methods would also plant the seeds of fear and resentment, forces that, in time, would rise against him. With the Zulu army firmly under his control and a society structured to support his vision, Shaka turned his attention outward. His ambition was boundless, his desire to unite or subjugate, his neighbors unwavering. This was the period of the Memphicane, or the Crushing, a series of intense military campaigns that would see Shaka extend his influence across southern Africa and forever reshape the region. Shaka's campaigns were characterized by both cunning and ferocity. In every direction, he encountered tribes and clans with long-established territories, each with their own warriors and leaders. Yet unlike Shaka's highly trained, disciplined, and strategically organized forces, these tribes relied on more traditional methods of warfare. They were no match for Shaka's reformed Zulu army, with its deadly iklwa spears and the relentless bullhorn formation. Shaka's troops moved quickly and struck with precision, often overwhelming larger forces by exploiting the element of surprise. One of Shaka's most significant early victories came against the Ndwandwe, a powerful neighboring tribe led by the formidable King Zwide. The Ndwandwe had long held influence over the Zulu and the Mthethwa, the latter of whom had once protected Shaka and his mother. This was no small enemy, and the Ndwandwe-Zulu War would be a defining conflict in Shaka's rise to supremacy. The war between the Zulu and the Ndwandwe erupted around 1817 and would last until 1819, a grueling test of Shaka's tactics and resilience. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Gokokli Hill, a pivotal encounter that would establish Shaka's reputation as a master tactician. At Gokokli Hill, Shaka and his warriors were heavily outnumbered by Zwide's forces. Yet Shaka's strategic mind transformed what seemed like a disadvantage into an advantage. He lured the Ndwandwe troops into a vulnerable position on the hill's slopes, where they struggled to maintain their formation. Shaka's warriors, hidden in strategic positions, attacked from above, raining down projectiles and charging with relentless force. The Ndwandwe, overwhelmed and outmaneuvered, retreated in disarray, leaving thousands of their warriors dead on the field. This victory was more than just a military win. It was a statement. Shaka had proved that his reformed Zulu army could defeat even the most formidable opponents. He had turned his people's long-standing fear of the Ndwandwe into a symbol of Zulu strength, showing his followers that no enemy was too powerful to overcome. But Shaka's ambitions extended beyond merely winning battles. He wanted to forge a Zulu kingdom that spanned vast territories, encompassing not just the Zulu people, but all who inhabited the region. He adopted a strategy of assimilation for the tribes he conquered. Those who submitted to his rule were incorporated into his kingdom, their warriors absorbed into the Zulu regiments, their customs gradually aligned with Zulu practices. In this way, Shaka expanded his influence without necessarily resorting to endless bloodshed. Yet, for those who resisted, Shaka's response was swift and brutal. One tactic Shaka employed to maintain control over newly conquered territories was the strategic placement of military outposts. These outposts, manned by loyal Zulu warriors, ensured that the local population remained obedient and that potential uprisings could be quickly quelled. Shaka's outposts served as a constant reminder of his power, a network of loyal soldiers stationed throughout the kingdom who could react to threats and enforce the king's will. Despite Shaka's innovative approach to conquest, his campaigns took a toll on the region. The sheer scale of his operations displaced entire populations, creating waves of migration as tribes fled from the advancing Zulu forces. This period of upheaval, known as the Memphicane, reshaped the demographics of southern Africa, with countless communities disrupted or destroyed in the wake of Shaka's relentless drive to expand his kingdom. The Zulu warriors, hardened by Shaka's unyielding discipline, spread fear wherever they went, and stories of their prowess and brutality traveled far beyond the lands they had conquered. Shaka's tactics were ruthless. He understood that fear was a powerful tool, and he did not shy away from using it to maintain control. Villages that resisted were often razed to the ground, their people slain or taken as captives. Shaka's policy of scorched earth left little doubt about the fate of those who defied him. This approach fostered a culture of obedience within his kingdom, but it also created a legacy of terror that would linger long after his death. The psychological impact of Shaka's campaigns extended beyond his enemies. Within his own army, he fostered an environment of absolute loyalty and fear. His warriors were expected to obey without question, and disobedience was met with brutal punishment. Any warrior who showed hesitation in battle, who questioned Shaka's orders, or who failed to uphold the Zulu code of strength and loyalty, was summarily executed. Shaka's leadership was absolute, his will unquestioned, and his army reflected his fierce resolve. As Shaka's kingdom grew, he increasingly relied on a network of spies and informants to maintain order across his vast territories. These agents reported on any signs of dissent or unrest, allowing Shaka to quell potential rebellions before they could take root. Through this network, Shaka kept a tight grip on his kingdom, ensuring that his rule extended into the farthest reaches of Zulu land. The fear of Shaka's retribution was enough to keep most in line, but for those who dared to resist, the consequences were swift and deadly. Yet Shaka's campaigns were not solely about conquest. He understood the value of alliances and diplomacy, and he sought to incorporate neighboring tribes through means other than warfare when possible. He extended offers of alliance to several tribes, offering them protection and a place within his expanding kingdom. While many accepted these terms, others viewed them as veiled threats and submitted only out of fear. Regardless of their motives, Shaka's kingdom continued to grow, incorporating a diverse array of peoples who, for better or worse, came under the Zulu banner. By the early 1820s, Shaka's Zulu kingdom stretched across vast territories, encompassing thousands of people from numerous tribes. His power was unmatched in the region, his influence extending far beyond the traditional boundaries of the Zulu. Yet, with each victory, Shaka's reliance on fear and violence deepened, and his methods grew increasingly harsh. The man who had once been an outcast was now a king, but his relentless drive for power was gradually isolating him, even from those who had once supported him. For Shaka, the expansion of his kingdom was not just about territory, it was about legacy. He sought to build a Zulu state that would endure, a powerful kingdom that would stand as a testament to his strength and vision. In his mind, the ends justified the means, and he saw his brutal methods as necessary to achieve the greatness he envisioned. Yet, even as he reached the peak of his power, there were signs that his reliance on fear and violence was beginning to take its toll on his own people. The legacy of Shaka's military campaigns is complex. On one hand, he had transformed the Zulu into a powerful and united kingdom, a force that commanded respect and instilled fear throughout southern Africa. His reforms had created a disciplined and resilient army, one that could stand against even the most formidable opponents. But on the other hand, his methods left a trail of destruction, and the relentless pressure he placed on his people bred resentment and fear. As Shaka's campaigns drew to a close, his focus shifted from external conquest to internal control. He had built an empire, but maintaining it would require just as much ruthlessness as expanding it had. The young warrior who had once been a cast-out son was now a ruler feared by all, yet isolated in his own kingdom. The seeds of dissent were beginning to take root, and Shaka would soon find that even the mightiest kings are not immune to the forces they unleash. By the early 1820s, Shaka stood as one of the most powerful and feared leaders in southern Africa. His campaigns had carved a vast Zulu kingdom from the lands of his conquered neighbors, and his disciplined army, infamous across the region, remained fiercely loyal, at least outwardly. Yet, as his power grew, so too did the dark side of his leadership. The warrior king who had once inspired his people with visions of a united Zulu nation now began to rule through suspicion, paranoia, and fear. Shaka's transformation from a fierce but fair leader to a feared tyrant wasn't sudden. It unfolded gradually as his kingdom expanded. Shaka's intense need for control and loyalty led him to impose ever stricter measures on his people. He was no longer content merely to command the obedience of his warriors. He now sought to monitor every corner of his kingdom, enforcing his rule with a relentless grip. To this end, he employed a vast network of spies and informants, whose task was to report any hint of disloyalty or dissent. The political climate within the Zulu kingdom became increasingly stifling. Shaka's lieutenants and even his closest advisors could not escape his suspicions. It is said that Shaka's mistrust extended to anyone he perceived as a threat, and he viewed all challenges to his authority as acts of betrayal. This was particularly true when it came to his family. As the king, Shaka's only true loyalty seemed to be to himself and the kingdom he had built, and this isolated him, even from those who had once supported him most closely. In 1827, the death of Shaka's mother, Nandi, marked a turning point in his reign. Shaka's bond with his mother had been extraordinarily close. She had been his protector, the one person who had always believed in him, even when he had been cast out and ridiculed by his father's clan. Her death devastated him. Overcome with grief, Shaka declared a prolonged period of mourning, ordering that no crops be planted, no cattle milked, and no marriages celebrated. Those who failed to display the appropriate level of mourning faced brutal punishments, with many reportedly put to death for failing to grieve sufficiently. Shaka's grief soon morphed into a kind of madness. His edicts grew increasingly extreme, and his paranoia intensified. Fearing conspiracies, he imposed even more severe restrictions on his people, who lived in constant fear of violating one of his new, unpredictable rules. The kingdom was plunged into chaos, its people caught between their reverence for Shaka's achievements and their terror of his unchecked wrath. For the first time, doubts began to surface about whether this warrior king, who had once seemed invincible, was truly fit to rule. Amidst this climate of fear, Shaka's warriors grew disillusioned. They had followed him loyally, drawn by his vision of a powerful Zulu kingdom, but now they saw only the shadow of the leader they had once admired. Shaka's erratic orders, his unpredictable temper, and his unending demands for loyalty created a strain within the army. The tightly bonded regiments that had once been the pride of the Zulu nation now murmured with unrest. Yet the possibility of rebellion was fraught with risk. Shaka's informants were everywhere, and punishment for even the hint of disloyalty was swift and brutal. Rumors spread of torture and executions within the royal court. Shaka's methods of maintaining power had once seemed justified by his vision, but now they appeared driven by a growing paranoia. He trusted no one, and those who had once advised him wisely were either silenced or turned into puppets, too fearful to speak the truth. In the midst of this, Shaka's attention turned increasingly inward. He began to see enemies everywhere, among his generals, his advisors, and even his family. Two of his half-brothers, Dingane and Malangana, who had once fought alongside him, now found themselves under the shadow of his suspicion. They knew that if Shaka's paranoia continued unchecked, it was only a matter of time before they too would face his wrath. Thus, an unspoken alliance formed between them, a pact born of desperation and fear rather than ambition. In September 1828, while visiting one of his royal kraals, Shaka was approached by Dingaan and Mlangana. Under the guise of a peaceful audience, they entered his quarters. In a swift, brutal attack, Shaka was stabbed repeatedly by his half-brothers and their conspirators. As he lay dying, some say he whispered a final prophecy, warning his assassins that they would eventually turn on each other. Whether these words were spoken or not, they foreshadowed a tragic irony that would plague the Zulu kingdom for years to come. Shaka's death marked the end of an era. The visionary who had transformed the Zulu from a small clan into a powerful kingdom was gone. Dingaan, his half-brother, assumed the throne, but he would never fully escape the shadow of the brother he had killed. The fear and suspicion that had defined Shaka's last days would haunt the Zulu kingdom, as Dingain struggled to hold together what his brother had built. Shaka's legacy was complex. He was both a unifier and a tyrant, a visionary and a paranoid ruler. He had transformed his people, giving them an identity that would endure for generations. But he had also left behind a kingdom scarred by fear and distrust. The Zulu kingdom would go on, but it would never again know a leader quite like Shaka. The death of Shaka left the Zulu kingdom in turmoil. He had been the unifying force, a leader whose vision and military prowess had taken a scattered group of clans and welded them into a single formidable kingdom. Yet, in his absence, the question of whether this unity could endure lingered over the land. The kingdom he had built had relied not just on strength, but on the sheer power of Shaka's personality, a power that left an indelible mark on his people and his enemies alike. In the immediate aftermath of Shaka's assassination, his half-brother Dingain assumed control of the Zulu kingdom. While Shaka had relied on fear and military discipline to maintain order, Dingain attempted a different approach, one that balanced between conciliation and control. However, he quickly discovered that ruling in Shaka's shadow was no easy task. The loyalty of the Zulu people had been forged in their loyalty to Shaka, and without him, that unity began to fracture. Dingain, while a capable leader, could not inspire the same awe or command the same respect. Dingain's reign was marked by attempts to consolidate the kingdom Shaka had built. He faced threats from within and beyond the kingdom's borders. Internally, Dingain struggled to contain the simmering resentment that had been left in Shaka's wake. Many had obeyed Shaka out of fear, and with his death, old rivalries and grievances resurfaced. Externally, Dingain was forced to confront the encroaching presence of the Voortrekkers, Boer settlers moving northward from the British-controlled Cape Colony. These settlers sought land and resources, bringing new tensions to the Zulu borders. The defining moment of Dingaan's rule came in 1838, during a confrontation with the Voortrekkers led by Piet Retief. Hoping to establish peaceful relations, Retief and his men traveled to Dingaan's kraal to negotiate for land. Dingain initially welcomed them, but, in a dramatic turn, ordered their capture and execution. This act ignited a fierce conflict, culminating in the Battle of Blood River, where the Voortrekkers, under the leadership of Andries Pretorius, inflicted a devastating defeat on the Zulu army. It was a significant turning point, one that foreshadowed the increasing pressure the Zulu kingdom would face from European settlers. The events of Dingain's rule illustrated the challenges of sustaining the kingdom Shaka had built. Shaka had expanded the Zulu borders through conquest and diplomacy, but his methods left deep scars. The crushing Mafikane that had unified the Zulu also created enemies and destabilized neighboring regions. These displaced peoples and rival tribes formed alliances, eager to resist Zulu dominance and eventually to ally with European forces against them. Beyond the immediate political consequences, Shaka's legacy extended to the very fabric of Zulu society. Shaka's military reforms, the iklwa, the bullhorn formation, and the regimented training, remained integral to Zulu culture. His warriors became a symbol of Zulu identity, their courage and discipline celebrated for generations. His tactics influenced not only his immediate successors, but other tribes throughout southern Africa. The impact of his military strategies was so profound that even European powers, upon encountering the Zulu, were forced to acknowledge their skill and resilience in combat. In many ways, Shaka's legacy was double-edged. On one hand, he had given the Zulu people a sense of unity and identity that endured long after his death. His creation of a centralized state and disciplined army enabled the Zulu to resist European encroachment for decades, even winning remarkable victories, such as the famous Battle of Isandlwana in 1879, where the Zulu defeated a well-armed British force against impossible odds. On the other hand, Shaka's methods left his people with a legacy of fear and suspicion. His rule had taught his successors the power of violence as a tool of governance, but it also instilled an underlying tension within the kingdom. This was a kingdom forged in conflict, and its very foundations rested on the strength of its ruler. Without Shaka's unifying presence, the Zulu kingdom struggled to maintain its cohesion, and over time divisions and rivalries threatened to tear it apart. In the decades following Shaka's death, the Zulu kingdom continued to face external pressures from both the British and the Boers. The kingdom reached its breaking point during the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, a conflict sparked by British expansionist ambitions and the desire to control southern Africa. This war, while ultimately resulting in a British victory, showcased the enduring strength of Shaka's legacy. The Zulu army, using Shaka's tactics, inflicted heavy casualties on the British at Isandlwana, one of the most humiliating defeats suffered by a European power in Africa. Yet, the Anglo-Zulu War also underscored the vulnerability of the Zulu kingdom without Shaka's leadership. Following their initial success, the Zulu could not withstand the overwhelming force of the British Empire, and by the war's end, the Zulu kingdom was fractured, its autonomy reduced to a memory. The British dismantled the Zulu state, dividing it into smaller chiefdoms to prevent the rise of another powerful ruler like Shaka. The kingdom he had built was, at last, broken, its unity dissolved by a combination of internal divisions and external pressure. Shaka's story endures not only as a tale of conquest and empire, but as a testament to the complexities of power. He was a visionary who lifted his people to greatness, yet he was also a man whose methods planted the seeds of his own kingdom's challenges. He had united the Zulu, instilled them with pride, and armed them with tactics that would outlive him. But he had also left a legacy of fear, a kingdom built on loyalty to him alone, and ultimately, a foundation that would be difficult for his successors to sustain. Shaka's legacy remains a subject of debate and fascination. Some view him as a tyrant whose ambition led to destruction, while others see him as a hero, a symbol of resistance against colonial oppression. The true story of Shaka Zulu lies somewhere in between, a complex portrait of a man whose vision reshaped southern Africa, whose ambition left an indelible mark, and whose methods left both unity and scars. As we reflect on Shaka Zulu's impact, it becomes clear that his legacy transcends his lifetime, leaving an indelible mark on African history and the broader world. His story endures as both a cautionary tale of power and ambition, and as a testament to African resilience, ingenuity, and leadership. Though his kingdom was eventually dismantled by British imperial forces, the legacy of Shaka's rule, both in cultural identity and military innovation, continues to echo across history. In modern times, Shaka's legacy is often viewed through the lens of resistance against colonialism. Although Shaka himself did not directly face European powers, his kingdom stood as a formidable bulwark against encroachment in the decades that followed his death. His unification of the Zulu people, his strict military discipline, and his centralized administration created a state strong enough to challenge colonial powers, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Shaka's Zulu kingdom would provide inspiration for future leaders and movements fighting for African autonomy and unity in the face of foreign domination. Shaka's story also poses a challenge to the typical Western narratives of African leadership, which often portray African kings and warriors as tribal or primitive. Shaka Zulu's reign contradicts these stereotypes, revealing a leader who was not only a brilliant tactician and visionary, but also a strategist capable of sophisticated reforms. His military innovations, including the creation of the short iklwa spear, the bullhorn formation, and regimented training camps, were revolutionary, not only within the context of southern Africa, but also on a global scale. Shaka's methods demonstrated a level of tactical insight that could rival that of European military leaders of his time, challenging the view that African societies lacked complex political and military structures. Yet Shaka's legacy is not without its shadows. The brutality and fear with which he governed left scars on Zulu society, a harsh reminder of the darker side of his reign. His campaigns, which led to the displacement and death of thousands, were both a unifying force for the Zulu and a devastating blow to neighboring tribes. His rule established a model of governance that relied heavily on absolute authority, loyalty, and fear, a model that subsequent leaders struggled to sustain without slipping into tyranny. To understand Shaka's legacy fully, one must grapple with this duality. Shaka was, undeniably, a product of his time, a period marked by intense conflict and competition among tribes and peoples. His response to these pressures was one of consolidation and militarization, turning his kingdom into a well-oiled war machine capable of surviving in a harsh and competitive landscape. In this sense, Shaka's ambition and ruthlessness were not merely expressions of personal power, but a reflection of the volatile world in which he lived. Historians continue to debate the nature of Shaka's legacy. Some argue that his achievements should be celebrated as those of a leader who succeeded in forging a powerful African state against the odds. Others contend that his methods of governance, particularly his use of fear, intimidation, and violence, mar his accomplishments. Ultimately, Shaka's story is a complex one, resisting easy categorization as either hero or villain. He was both a visionary and a tyrant, a unifier and a destroyer. In popular culture, Shaka's image has often been romanticized, painted as a symbol of African pride and resistance. Films, books, and documentaries have depicted him as a near-mythical figure, a warrior king who defied the odds and forged a kingdom from the sands of time. However, this romanticization sometimes glosses over the more troubling aspects of his rule, casting him as a one-dimensional hero, rather than the multifaceted and controversial leader he truly was. In South Africa today, Shaka's legacy remains a point of pride and reflection. His name carries weight, representing both the potential for African leadership and the complexities of wielding power. Zulu cultural heritage celebrates Shaka's achievements and the identity he helped forge. His legacy is commemorated in various ways, from statues and historical sites to traditional Zulu ceremonies and festivals that honor his memory and the traditions he helped shape. Shaka's influence is also felt beyond Africa. His story has become part of the global conversation about leadership, power, and the cost of ambition. In leadership studies, Shaka's life and reign are often cited as examples of transformational leadership, showing how vision and charisma can unify people, but also how unchecked authority can lead to destructive ends. Shaka's rise from obscurity to power, his methods of instilling loyalty, and his skill in building a structured and disciplined state continue to provide lessons for leaders across cultures. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Shaka's life is the recognition of the power of identity and unity. Shaka understood that a kingdom built solely on conquest would not endure. He recognized the importance of giving his people a shared identity, one that transcended their differences and instilled in them a sense of belonging to something larger. His reforms, both social and military, were designed not just to create a powerful army, but to forge a lasting identity for the Zulu people, one that would survive long after his death. The story of Shaka Zulu is ultimately a story of human ambition, resilience, and the dual nature of power. His legacy, both celebrated and scrutinized, endures as a symbol of African pride and complexity. His life stands as a reminder of the heights that can be achieved through vision and determination, as well as the dangers of a rule that relies too heavily on fear and control. In the end, Shaka's legacy is not merely a tale of conquest, but a narrative about the struggle for identity, the impact of leadership, and the delicate balance between strength and tyranny. The kingdom he built, though ultimately subdued by colonial powers, left a lasting imprint on history, a testament to the enduring spirit of the Zulu people and the man who dared to unite them under one banner. And that concludes our deep dive into the life, reign, and enduring legacy of Shaka Zulu, a leader whose vision transformed the course of Southern African history. Shaka's story is as compelling as it is complex, a tale that forces us to consider the dual nature of power, the impact of unity, and the costs of ambition. whether seen as a hero, a tyrant, or something in between. Shaka's life reminds us of the heights and challenges of leadership and the resilience that defines a people. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this exploration of Shaka Zulu's life engaging, please like, subscribe, and share this video with others who may be interested in understanding the fascinating tapestry of African history. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you see Shaka as a visionary, a tyrant, or perhaps both? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, stay tuned to Bytes for more in-depth looks at historical figures who have shaped our world in ways that still echo today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.